Hello and welcome. My name is Sanjay Soni. Here's a microlearning readiness video on ingesting data using Azure Databricks in Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Now let's get started. Hi Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Sanjay.
So what do you do at Microsoft?
I'm a principal program manager in the Azure SQL Data Warehouse team.
So how would a customer load data into Azure SQL Data Warehouse? Let's say we want to load JSON data. How would you do that?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. Probably one of the easiest is to use some of the services we already have available to us. Microsoft Azure has a service called the Azure Databricks service. And this is a partnership between Microsoft and the Databricks company that brings, basically Spark into Azure as a first-party service. So let's make a real scenario here. Let's imagine that I work for a lottery board, and I want to go through and do a simple analysis of, have we ever used the same numbers to produce a lottery result? So are we duplicating numbers? Is our random number selection really random? And so I want to go through and look at that. That data is available, and so we can go ingest that data. We could look at that data and see, is there a number that's hot? So maybe a customer of the lottery could cheat. So the way we would do that is we would start by creating an Azure Databricks cluster, and you can see on my screen here, that's the first thing I've done. And it's a simple cluster. This is just running the latest version of Azure Databricks. And it's running the 4.3 version of the Databricks runtime. In this case, I'm going to use Scala to code my notebook in just a minute. But I really only have 2 workers, maximum of 8. They're pretty small, but they're really there to be able to go execute a pipeline of steps that I want to go run. So the first thing I did once I created my cluster was I went and I created a new notebook. Now a notebook is a collection of commands that I can have the cluster execute. So we'll walk through this kind of step-by-step on how we would go from taking that JSON data out of a public domain, in this case a public website, the data.gov site. We'll pull that into Databricks, we'll manipulate that JSON, and then we'll push it into Azure SQL Data Warehouse, where we'll do some final kind of analysis of the data. So we'll start with just some setup. These are just some variables that kind of help keep the script a little cleaner. The next thing we'll do is you'll see this second command, which is going to go read the JSON data. So it's going to go out to, as you can see, the data.newyork.gov site. It's going to read the JSON file, and it's going to pull that back into the notebook here, into the runtime. And you can see here's a sample of that JSON. So it contains a couple of different things. The first is a meta view, which defines all of the different pieces of data, including each one of the columns by type. And if we scroll all the way down a little bit, you'll see down near the bottom, we'll actually start to get the data. And so that's what we're really interested in. Particularly, we're interested in a couple of things. This column over here that's highlighted, that includes the date of when the lottery draw happened, and the very next set of values after that, which is actually the numbers that were drawn. So we're going to use those here in the next kind of bits. And this is historically, so as you can see, this is all lottery numbers drawn from the New York lottery from the year 2002. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our next command, and we're going to convert that string of data that we got back from a public site. We're going to turn that into a JSON file. And then once we're done, we're going to explode that JSON file by using that data tag, and we're going to give it an alias. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And what we've done is we've now turned this into a JSON file that we can manipulate, and then we've exploded it, and we're really looking at that data. Now the alias we'll use consistently here throughout the rest of the commands. The next part we want to take is we actually want to go and look at the data itself, and we want to pick the columns that we want to work with. In this case, I've taken a couple of them, and you can see I've grabbed the first column and I've given it an alias or an ID that I can then continue to work with. And you can see I've done this through a couple of the columns. Now we can also take here in Databricks and Scala, we can split a column. Now I'm splitting the number column, and I'm picking the first ordinal, and I'm giving it a name, number 1. And then I'm doing the same thing, grabbing the second ordinal, I'm calling it number 2. And I continue through until I get all of the different numbers. Now if I run this here, what you'll see is that we've now got what looks like a tabular structure, so with rows and columns with all of the data split. Very, very simple. And then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my last command, which will show me how I can simply take the data from this JSON kind of structured format in the frame and push this into Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now, the Azure SQL Data Warehouse team and the Databricks team have done a lot of work to integrate this and make this as simple as possible. You literally have to provide just a connection string and a storage location, and using Polybase under the covers, we're able to grab that data, land it in storage, and ingest it into the SQL Data Warehouse by simply just a couple of options here. By doing this, it gives you all of that parallel capability. Now, this isn't a lot of data, so we're not going to be showing you loading a terabyte of data or 5 terabytes of data, but it's really that process of pushing that data into storage and then being able to parallelize import that data into the data warehouse. So I'll go ahead and run this. And what's happening now is that the cluster itself is actually now processing that data, and it's pushing it into Azure SQL Data Warehouse. As you can see, there was a note there very quickly that it was pushing it to storage and then ingesting it into Data Warehouse. So through these simple 5 commands, I was able to take a JSON file from the internet, manipulate it, and then push it into my data warehouse. Now from here, we're going to want to continue to kind of work through that data set. So we've got it into our data warehouse. And as I flip back over here to my SQL Management Studio, you can see that I can actually go in and look at the data in that table that we just created. So in this case, it's about 1,700 rows. It's not a lot. And let's go inspect the data just to make sure that it's there. So we can see that we have that data. We can see by ID, the draw date, the numbers, and the bonus number for that particular lottery draw. Now, given this data is not necessarily typed the way I want, I'm going to use what's called a CTAS operation, or a create table as select. And what a create table as select does is it allows me to take the data from one table and push it into a new table using a select operation.
And it's super fast.
And it's super fast. It's all done in parallel as a batch operation within the system. And it creates that new table with the new format and structure that I like. In this case, I'm going to cast, so I get the different data types. I want to cast each one of these as a particular data type. And then I'm going to move that into my new table. So I'm simply going to execute this. I now have a new table of 1,700 rows or so. And then finally, I want to do that analysis. So we're really looking to see how random is our number generation. Do we have any places where we've duplicated all of the numbers in the bonus number? Is that something that occurs very often? So we're simply going to run a query. And this is a simple count across all of those numbers. And lo and behold, we actually find that we have never duplicated in the state of New York lottery numbers. So simply taking a Databricks notebook, or a cluster with a notebook, we're able to grab all of that data, push it into an Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and then do our analytics. And this took all of about 5 commands to do between the notebook and now within SQL Data Warehouse to really get an answer to our question. Now this was a simple example of how we could do this, but you can imagine the same frame for being able to take IoT data being ingested in JSON format or from sensors or meters and being able to ingest that, manipulate it, and then push it on into your data warehouse for further processing and downstream kind of semantic modeling. And really kind of give you that capability of both live streaming as well as being able to do a batch in the case of the scenario I just showed you.
Wow, this is fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Sanjay, for having me.
Thank you for watching this video. Learn more about this and other topics at azure.com/SQLDW.